So as I mentioned, tank to tank. So we're going to learn more what that means. And I thought to kind of get things rolling here, we would have one of our guests sort of describe, I guess, the physical situation around what's really happening up there in Portland. And as a way to maybe put some more visual cues to the oral description, we have a really cool video, kind of a flyover of the area that we'll be talking about. So as one of you sort of explains and describes things, I'm going to cue up this video and give people a better sense of just physically, if they're not aware of it already, what we're talking about here. So in fact, if one of you wanted to kind of just get things rolling, I'm going to find that video and get that queued up and we can get rolling here. So feel free, whoever it is that wants to jump in, if it's Sean or Nancy.
Sure.
Or
I will. Thank you. I am Sean Looney and I live in Linton. So we are part of the critical energy infrastructure, aka the CEI hub, also known by me most of the time as the tank farms. And all of Linton, here we have the tank farms. Of course, that's the Willamette River and Forest Park in the foreground, and North Portland, St. John's, and other parts of North Portland in the background, the railroad bridge, the St. John's Bridge. It doesn't necessarily right now go in order of how you see it, but as you can read as I talk, the CEI hub has 90 to 95% of Oregon's fuel, all in these wonderful tanks you see. You can see how old, most of them are quite old. Some of them built in the 1920s, in fact, and still in use. All of that ground you see them on used to be part of the river, and it is infill. It is liquefiable soil. It is shaky ground, if you would call it that. It is not solid. There is no bedrock whatsoever underneath that soil. In the earthquake that we are anticipating, that right there, that big blue tank, by the way, is liquefied natural gas. It's very close to the St. John's Bridge. It has a blast radius that is gigantic. This is Linton behind the tanks. There are about 300 million gallons of fuel in this CEI hub, about 600 tanks, some of which are so old that they, like you can see right there, 2 of them don't even have roofs on them. They're just sitting there empty, but most of them are not empty. Most 500 or so are not empty. They are full of fuel, diesel, gasoline, other various fuels.
what else about the situation there? Like what's driving, your current campaign? We'll kind of get to how you guys gotten there, but what's the real issue or the real issues around what's happening there with the storage of the fuel? You kind of touched on it, Sean, around sort of the shaky ground there and the idea of the earthquake, but maybe describe a little bit more for everyone. What are the people in that area really facing, which ultimately, you also mentioned, 90-93% of Oregon's fuel sitting in one location. It's not just a localized situation here. This is statewide, regional, depending on what sort of, I guess, calamity can happen. So I don't know, give us more of a flavor, any one of you, or like,
Sure.
I guess, what's the big deal in sort of shorthand?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. There are 10, 11 major oil facilities here. We've attempted to have dialogues with them. We get responses from their trade association says to us, you're fine, no problem here. We've got you covered, plenty of inspections. And this is in the face of a number of reports that have been published detailing the magnitude of a disaster that could occur with a Cascadia 9.0 subduction zone event off the coast. But the Portland Hills Fault is also parallel to these tanks. In fact, some of them sit pretty much on top of it. A lesser magnitude earthquake of 6 something will create more fatalities, more structural damage than the Cascadia big one that everyone refers to. There are also other triggers that could cause problems here. There are floods. We're in a floodplain. There are rail car accidents. You saw the railroads in the image. Any number of things could trigger something. Some of you may have seen yesterday or the day before a lightning strike in Louisiana. Did anyone see that? Lightning strike in Louisiana, momentary pause, little glimmer, and then huge fire. The fuel, if the soil liquefies, the fuel, much of it will flow into the river, the Columbia, the Willamette, going into the Columbia all the way to the ocean. There will be fires. You saw where Forest Park is. It is a conflagration of unparalleled size that we live in and the neighbors around us live in. And the tank farm owners have known of these issues publicly for more than 10 years. When the Oregon Resilience Plan was published in 2013, they have done virtually nothing to make them safer, including not speaking with us. So we're concerned for our lives, for the environment, for wildlife. It's a major issue. And it's an issue, as Kai implied, for the state, because the state would be without energy to fuel recovery should something like this happen. So that's led us to where we are.
So everyone, we've talked obviously prior to being here this evening. It's like everyone seems to be in the know. The industry knows, the various agencies knows, local government officials know. This isn't something that just showed up yesterday. I mean, what is sort of the arenas of discussion, or what are kind of the venues for what comes up around these tank farms? And then maybe within that, what have citizen individuals or citizen groups or organized activist groups, how have they been engaging in the realities here of what this all means? I mean, what does that world look like based on your observation, and I know your own experiences? I mean, what does it look like? Like, kind of describe that for people so they can kind of get an understanding of, here you have this calamity in the making, just waiting for that little match to drop, and knowing all the ramifications. Yet, as you mentioned, Nancy, there doesn't seem to be much happening, but maybe describing what is the not happening look like, I suppose. Pam?
Go ahead.
I want to say that, Kai, you described all the different groups who know all about it and what the heck is happening. There's a large group that doesn't know all about it, and that's the people who live here in Multnomah County. And those are the people we're currently trying to inform, feeling that the reason that there hasn't been any action surely is partly because so few people actually know about it. And Sean, I wanted to ask you if you could tell the story of somebody you talked with in your neighborhood. Linton is a neighborhood of Portland, and about 1,000 people live there, right?
Yeah, 2,000 people in Linton there.
Actually, I've always quoted 1,500. I just saw 1,000. And so we're somewhere between 1 and 2, folks.
Yeah.
We're small.
Yeah. I was talking to my neighbor just like 2 days ago, and she drives down St. Helens Road, Highway 30, which is essentially the corridor where the tanks are. And we have put up 3 billboards that say, entering the blast zone, 600 tanks waiting to explode, and keep PDX safe, tank the tanks. And I asked her, hey, have you seen those billboards? Because I know she goes to work every single day and comes home on that corridor. And she's worked she works at the zoo, in fact, and she goes that way every single day, 5 days a week. And she said, you know, I had never noticed those tanks until I saw those billboards. And then I looked over and I said, oh my goodness, there they are. I hope they don't explode while I'm driving past them. And, you know, I mean, I was pleased that she saw the billboards, and I was pleased that she had an alarm go off, but I was also somewhat horrified to think that this woman has been driving past those for at least 5 years and did not register at all what they were, why they were there, what was in them. It was somewhat terrifying to me that there are that, and she's just a smart lady, you know, but she's just representative, I'm sure, of many, many thousands of people who have driven by the CEI hub numerous times and haven't thought a whit about what they are and might they be dangerous? Because of course the answer is yes, they might be very, very dangerous.
Yeah, it feels like, you know, that situation may not be unusual for all kinds of situations. And the thing that kind of popped into my head is, you know, what's your experience or your sense of people's belief that, well, someone else is taking care of it, someone else is watching out for us? I mean, how much of that have you encountered in your own activism work that led to your campaign that we'll get into here in a little bit more specifically? But you've had your own journeys to kind of get to this point around the tanks, but how much of that exists out there that, you know, someone's taking care of this, I don't have to pay attention?
I think we see a lot of fear when people start to glimpse the magnitude. The county, Multnomah County, came out with a report 1.5 years ago, started 2 years ago, finished it last January in conjunction with the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management with the city, detailing the seismic impact. And we felt we knew a lot of that. It was still heavy duty reading to sit down and see all of this, the risks that we're living in. People see it and they, for whatever reason, oftentimes shrug and we don't see them again. Are they afraid? Yeah. Are they maybe depressed? Yes. Do they really think somebody's going to do something? I don't know that that would be the case. We started looking for someone who could address this, and we were astounded by the complexity and levels of organization of agencies that are stakeholders, that have some vested interest in the hub, and they don't seem to talk to each other either. And that's excruciating, obviously. We should all be working together.
Yeah.
So what were some of the, I know there's been a lot of moments and phases and events that sort of have all kind of culminated and continue to feed on one another as it stands today. But as you think about it, what are some of the kind of keystone moments in sort of your journey to tonight, for instance? Like, how did you guys get involved? You know, how did you meet? You know, how are you becoming more aware? Because I'm going to venture to guess that the four of you maybe were not so dissimilar in some ways to the person that Sean just described. Maybe not to that level of not knowing that they were there, but you've had your own experience of sort of learning a whole bunch, and in some ways probably exceeding, you know, the information download that is surpassed probably those who are quote unquote in positions of authority. Like I'm sure a lot of other people here tonight who become regular activists, you start to know more about the situation than the people that are supposedly making the decisions. So I don't know, maybe highlight sort of the journey, you know, at least to the point of kind of the idea of tanking the tanks.
You know, Nancy and I belong to the Linton Neighborhood Association, which is you know, we've been in part of the neighborhood association for many, many years now. And we've through the years had various folks come and speak with us about safety concerns. And, you know, our concern oftentimes is, you know, let's get somebody who will tell us about the tanks or about the earthquakes or about the train traffic. We've had any number of speakers, and most people will say, like, let's take the fire department. They will say, there is foam at each and every one of those tank farm groupings, but there's not enough foam, that is a suppressant, a fire suppressant. There is not enough by any stretch to actually, if one tank ignites another tank, we will just stand back and let it burn. That's all we can do. Scott Burns, a geologist, came to a neighborhood association and talked to us about the soil and how it was liquefiable and how we were on a fault line and we were unsafe. A lady from Portland Bureau of Emergency Management came several years ago, and her evening with us was puzzling, horrifying. She just said, you folks in Linton are not safe. And what I would propose is that Linton just become an industrial sanctuary, and that the city purchase your homes, and that you folks just find a safer place to be and just leave your homes. You can never be safe there anyway. The city perhaps might buy those homes, and it will just be for that, the whole 6 mile stretch will just be for industry. Now, those of us who love our homes, and many of us have beautiful views of the river and the mountains, and we don't want to sell our homes. We want to be safe, and we want the tanks to be those folks who leave. Not because we're saying we don't like gas and oil. We do. We know we depend on it, but they're just in the perfectly wrong location. That is the problem. They just cannot be safely there. And I think that's what Nancy and I came to, and that's what Pam and Paula came to, is there is no safe way to live among 600 tanks and 300 million gallons of flammable liquids when it all is sitting on liquefiable soil. It just isn't safe. Nancy?
Paula, did you want to talk a little about how we migrated through a training course together?
I would like to talk about that. I'd like to talk about Democracy School, because that was what brought us all together. I'm just, for me, just backing up a little bit and getting to Democracy School was, happened a little bit after I had, actually a couple of years after I had started to teach a science unit. I was a middle school teacher in North Portland at a school that's within the blast zone of the CEI hub. And, my journey to school each day, I live in the Northwest, and my home looks down on the industrial zone. And I would travel along Highway 30 across the St. John's Bridge over to Astor School. And on the way there, I'd pass by all those tanks every day. And I was also one of those people just driving by. This is this piece of the journey that's not going to be so pretty, but soon I'll get to the bridge, and that's really pretty, and then I'll be off to school. And it was in the middle of teaching the science unit on energy that I really started to say, well, what's really relevant here? Like, what actually is in those tanks? And where do we get energy for our city, for our state? So I, at the same time, I was kind of pondering that there was a notice from 350 about Zenith meeting, and I attended Zenith, the Zenith meeting. And Zenith is one of the companies of the CEI hub. That's a transporting fuel company. It brings fuel from the Balkans and the tar sand area across the rails and over into the hub. Anyway, so I ended up teaching a unit about Zenith to my students, and it was a piece of like, here are these kiddos that are living here. Their backyard is also the hub. So it was that the piece that I think that's always so amazing to me, and that we are kind of blindsided by what we see right here, and we're not really drilling into the danger. And so anyway, so that was the beginning of my activism. And then eventually I met Pam and Ella Ray at a tour in the hub. And we started asking the questions to each other, like, why don't, why don't we know what's in our neighborhood? And so it's one of those things where this imminent danger, and yet why don't more people know what's going on? Eventually, Ella Ray and Pam had gone to democracy school, and so they were, really great in bringing that piece to our activism and saying, this is something that we can all attend and find out more about. Who has the power and why do these corporations have so much power over our community? So meeting Nancy and Sean through Democracy School was really pivotal. We all landed on the same goal of wanting to get those tanks out of there. I'm just saying, really the only way that we're going to be safe is to tank the tanks.
I'll just add one point, if I may. Sean and I are both part of the neighborhood emergency team, which in your neighborhoods, you may have something called CERT, the Citizen Emergency Response Team. And our job as lay people is to take a certain amount of training and to foster emergency preparedness in the neighborhood by sharing information. And that is always directly dependent upon the unique hazards of the area. Well, we have tons of them. And as such, we were asked to look for evacuation routes. We were asked what kind of supplies we need. And so the more we investigated, the more the reports came out. Hills behind us, tree fall and landslide, the river going that way filled with fuel that will be in flames. Highway 30, North St. Helens Road, is the only road in and out of town. We don't have a lot of options. And we said, well, we need to talk to these tank farm people. And we told you that did not go well. So that coupled with increasing awareness, the activists involved with Zenith, another group that was very instrumental in building awareness was the county doing this report that I mentioned, released a year and a half ago. And on the heels of that, last March, the state legislature passed a bill 1567 that authorized any agency for the first time in history oversight over those facilities. And it's not infinite oversight. It's very specifically to request seismic stability studies. So the companies have to independently conduct seismic stability studies and submit mitigation plans, which they will then implement on a timeline. So we have had a little action, and there just have been a number of things that really seem to be growing right now. So we're trying to take advantage of being involved with the activists locally. Sean and I operated pretty much in isolation. We didn't know anybody was interested in this for a number of years. And when we found other people out there that shared our interests, it was quite a boon, quite an inspiration to us. So we're involved in a coalition of 20 plus organizations, and we're collaborating on issues. So that feels good, but taking on the petrochemical industry, a little daunting, you might say, a little daunting. And we also know that that will not happen through the traditional channels because it's all too ingrained in the system.
Yeah, I mean, that's both Paula, your own sort of journey and what you just described right now, Nancy. I mean, obviously there's people here I know who are dealing with similar issues in the sense of, the corporate timber industry, or just the realities of things like in Douglas County. We have some folks here tonight, with a particular dam that really shouldn't be there anymore. And so much of the stories are very similar in the sense of you, in a way, become kind of comfortably numb to your realities. And yet when you start to ask different questions, how difficult it is to find the pathway or to make your own pathway to deal with it, which is, a big component of your own story. I mean, what kind of led me beyond sort of converging at Cell Def's Democracy School and getting some more sort of, I guess, awakening towards really how the system functions, and then examples of what others have done to sort of contest that and sort of, start building the possibility of a different reality. I mean, what did it look like for the four of you to say, you know what, we need to ask a very different question here? So much of it's focused on, yeah, we'll do these studies, or we'll do these mitigation plans, or we'll basically tell you how you're going to be incinerated, or we'll let you know, it's pretty bad. You should probably, lobby the city just to buy you out. So it's all this, like, all predicated on that the tank farms themselves are somehow untouchable. Everything is about sustaining the tank farms where they are in one way, shape, or form or the other. And the four of you have come at it from a very different vantage point. And I know we've talked about it perhaps as being sort of an obvious question or really an obvious proposal. But to your last point, Nancy, man, it's pretty scary to say this is what we're going to demand. And when we do so, we've got some immediate adversaries that are pretty formidable. So again, you have your own situation there that I would love to hear more about, but also just to say that's a fairly common thing no matter where you're at, in the sense of when you start to stand up to how things work and speak out. Yeah, there's a lot that comes with it. So it'd be great to kind of understand a little bit of your guys' backstory that eventually landed to this idea of, the tanks got to go. We got to tank the tanks.
I'll tell a little bit of the story. I think 3 points. One is that we're talking about Linton a lot, and Linton is the neighborhood where the CEI hub is located. But Linton isn't the only neighborhood that's going to be up in smoke and under toxic air. The neighborhoods right smack across the river are at grave risk, and Forest Park and all the neighborhoods here, the wonderful, beautiful neighborhoods in the hills. So actually, the Zenith oil trains carry the dangers of the CEI hub throughout the county and way beyond. And in fact, the Physicians for Social Responsibility, Oregon, did a big beautiful production about Zenith, in which they show that over 25% of Multnomah County residents are in the blast zone of Zenith. So this is a lot of us, more than 1,500 or so. I want to talk about Democracy School a little bit. Kai was the main teacher of our Democracy School. And in the course of the school, which is we had 4 sessions, about 24 people. We looked closely at the Constitution and examples of people working for rights of nature and community rights and so on. And Kai offered to support people who wanted to take action, and we really took advantage of that. We had a lot of Kai's time, and in-person meetings as well as Zoom meetings. As COVID passed, we were able to get together, and dogs. Third point is how we got to the notion of telling the truth, or of stating, oh, the tanks have got to go. That was a whole process, and it was a scary one. We know from Nancy and Sean's stories that we've talked about that Sean mentioned this upon first meeting Nancy. Well, we got to get rid of the tanks. But for the group of the 4 of us, the first time I heard it was from Paula. She's like, well, the tanks have just got to go. Really? Is that even possible? And then soon after that, we proposed the idea to Kai in a meeting here, and he said, that's it, you're right, they've got to go, there's no question. And then from then on, Kai and Ella Ray and Nancy Ward from CELDF and Oregon Community Rights Network have been very supportive. Many people outside of that circle as well. But it was very scary at first to think that we're going to actually say tank the tanks out loud. Won't that scare people?
Yeah, we got a little bit of pushback too when we would say or we would say the tanks have to go, because people would often ask, well, where do the tanks go? 90% of the state's fuel is stored here. Where do we put them? And so it's a hard thing, because ideally they would just be gone, but the reality is we're still needing the fuel to run our state. So, at the very least, they should be spread out, or they should be put on bedrock. But the goal is that they simply need to get out of this very dangerous area that they're in, this liquefiable soil with the earthquake overdue.
I was just going to say that the first time I heard it was from Sean when I met her at the neighborhood association. I said, tell me about these tanks. She explained it and I said, well, what are we going to do? And she said, they've got to move. And I laughed at her. So you can see I've come a long way in 10 years. But when Scott Burns came to lecture, to do a presentation for us, he advocated that they have to move. They have to go to solid ground. A number of experts in writing, I think in OSPAC or Dogami's experts have said they cannot stay there. Jay Wilson is one of our mentors. He's the former chair of the Oregon Seismic Safety Policy Advisory Commission, called OSPAC. He has a vision that they absolutely must go. And the question of where, we answer with, that's not our problem, but this is not safe. This is not safe for human life, for the state, downriver, the tribes. And so we can't tolerate it. So you, whoever you are, need to figure out where they will go. There's so many things we didn't know. So we asked people to join us at meetings and we picked their brains about everything we could think of. And we got a little smarter. We also realized that we're never going to have all of the answers, but there are people out there that are moving in this direction, that reducing the fuel, eliminating the tanks, putting them elsewhere. And it doesn't hurt that we're drawing down fossil fuels right now. But of course, the federal and the state impetus is, oh yeah, we'll get rid of fossil fuel. We'll give you renewables. Renewables are still toxic. They are still flammable. That really doesn't help us, folks. And so we're getting pushback from the city, who said we absolutely have to transition through renewables. We can't get to electrification quickly. And we're saying we can't tolerate this.
So you've kind of drawn a line in the sand, so to speak, it feels like, which is, again, fairly similar to what other communities have done, saying, the dam has to go, the toxic spraying needs to go. I mean, that it is, again, the obvious, it is the sort of the commonsensical thing to do based on what everyone knows, but it isn't something, again, the authorities are doing or saying or working towards. I mean, that's kind of that upstream unfortunate reality. And the other thing that'd be interesting, I think, to hear about is, once people kind of come to understand this, which usually your situation is very typical in the sense that there's a couple of people who are like, we're done. We need to find a different way. We need to make a different way. This can't continue as is. How do we muster some energy, capability, impact to sort of change our reality, knowing what we're up against? How do we go about doing that? And people will find different ways of being recognized, of having awareness, and then having that somehow lead to action. I mean, how did you guys come to, again, the proposal of tanking the tanks, and now you've got this kind of mini campaign going? I mean, what was some of that sort of thinking, or how did that come to be a sense of like, well, here's our first sort of salvo into the effort here to make this a reality? I mean, how did some of that come to be? Because I think that's important for people to understand that there's going to be different pathways at times, to try to actualize what it is you're seeking, and sometimes it may not feel adequate enough. but these are sometimes how things begin to build momentum.
Yeah, I can speak to that a bit. Nancy and I, many years ago, sent letters to the big players. It's BP Arco and Chevron and Kinder Morgan and all the major corporations who are international. We sent letters to them locally, and we got no response from any of them. And then we got a response from Western States Petroleum Association. Who is, how would you describe them compared to?
I just lost the words. They're a trade organization that 8 of the companies here belong to. So this is an organization that represents their industry.
Almost like a union organizer kind of thing. But they sent us a couple pages of why we should not be concerned, as Nancy mentioned. But the essentially in this 2 different letters, it was about the safety standards and how they are, top of the line safety standards. And we continued to say to them, yes, but none of these tanks adhere to those safety standards because they are grandfathered in. They do not need, as long as they don't do anything with them, like try to make them better, they can just leave them as they are and in their pathetic and very, very old state. And it's all good. It's all okay. So all of the information she gave us about these wonderful safety standards and the ANSI standard, this and that, and this and that, was just gobbledygook, because none of the tanks that are very well, 95+% of the tanks don't adhere to any of those safety standards. So therein, it's like, we can't live with them. The corporations are not going to make a change just because we want them to. They're not going to say, wow, these tanks in Portland, Oregon are sitting on liquefiable soil. This is very dangerous for these poor folks in Portland. Should, there be a catastrophe, they're just going to move on. We are just one little hub in their international effort. And we're not on their radar as far as we can tell. We have never had any one of them actually speak with us. So, it feels that we are up against these folks that don't want to talk to us, don't want to dialogue with us, just want us to, go away and leave them alone. That's kind of how it feels.
As you've said, just one second, Paul, I'm going to say one thing and then I'll hand it off to you. As you've said, this is not a unique, well, it is a unique situation, but it's not unlike others. And when accidents occur, the East Palestine train issue, people start listening up and they pay attention. Every time there is something in the news that relates to tank farms, we get a whiff of interest, and then sometimes it dies down. But I'm sure Paula's going to carry this on. Paula, thanks.
It's just making me think of, corporate privilege. So I'm going back to, the box of allowable activism. So, as activists, we are always asking that question of how does this work in our system? We were told in our civics class that you go through these certain channels, you petition the city, you talk to the county, you reach out to the state, to the feds. You have a regulatory system that's supposed to be protecting you. These corporations have tremendous power, and they're not playing like how we thought they were supposed to be playing within this system of democracy. So I think asking those big questions of, does the system, is it working? Is the system working for communities? Is the system working for nature? And, for our group, we're always in that reflection cycle of like, okay, what can we do? And how will we see if it works? What's our metric? So if our metric is that tanks are gone, that's a huge goal. So what are the steps along the way? And we don't know what's going to work. And like we said, we're lucky to be part of a coalition of activists. There are people who have been working on this for a very long time, very smart people that are all working together, and and we're all saying, well, what's going to work? How do we get rid of those tanks? And so for our group, we said, okay, how do we spread the word? So it may be, if our metric, is to energize this movement against the tanks, how do we inform people? And that's when we decided on the billboard campaign. And I think it was Sean who had brought up the idea of billboards. So was that right? I think we were all kind of brainstorming, but yeah. So Sean, do you want to talk about the billboards?
Well, I think that we realized early on that much of our challenge is to have people educated. Like, why aren't you outraged? Well, because you don't know. That's why you're not outraged. But if you knew, maybe you would be. And, many voices are what it's going to take. Many small voices can make a big noise. So we brainstormed a lot about what do we do? Do we do a protest? Do we put out, do we put things on the internet? What do we do? And so, I was thinking, well, a lot of people drive right by these tanks. What if we put billboards up? So that was kind of the beginning. And then of course we spent a lot of time on what would we tell them. A billboard can't have a lot of information on it because people are flying by it at least 50 miles an hour. It's got to just be eye-catching, a word or two. So anyway, we worked long and hard on what to say and how to say it. And we rented 3 billboards that are in fairly close proximity and put our 3 messages on. And in anticipation of that, and in anticipation of the fact that there wasn't going to be a lot that we could say on these 3 billboards, we also got a website together and we said, okay, this is going to pique people's interest, or so we hope. So let's make a website that answers the questions that they might have as they drive by these billboards. And we at the same time as getting the billboards ready, we also got a website together. Pam, you had your hand. You want to say something more?
2 things. One is that we also have an Instagram account, which was quite a hurdle for those of us utterly disinterested in Instagram for whatever reason. Like, oh, now we sort of get it. And we have an account, and Ella Ray Woodland has created our postings and led us in that. The second thing is that we got not 1 billboard, we got 3 billboards. What was that about? That was about Andrew Dixon, one of our advisors, who's one of the 2 people who run the Moth storytelling here in Portland. And he's also like a PR guy.
He's a Whiten and Kennedy, ex-Whiten and Kennedy guy. We were looking for like a professional, we got to find some good PR people.
Yeah. And we had this idea and that idea. And what do you think? What do you think? We'd have Zoom meetings with him and email with him. And he's the person who said, oh, 3 billboards, because you want to tell a story. You want to engage the viewer in a narrative. So we got 3 billboards. And we got that with money. Paula, where do we get that money?
It's the pseudo grant, Stand Up to Oil. So we have been able to fund the billboards through the pseudo grant.
You guys are, clearly you've asked the right question, or you've posed the right question or the right action. You're now in this awareness end of it. You've got to inform people, for those that don't know what they should know. But to kind of put you on the spot, what next? Because you could fill people up 10 times over with information. And if the situation stays as it is, because frankly, that's a lot of what conventional activism has done, is it's made people experts on the situation with little to no actual action coming from it, that we just become informed and then we just sort of follow the dance as it's prescribed to us. So as you guys think ahead, and what is it going to take? And you may not have the particulars figured out, but I think you understand it's going to take tremendous pressure to actually make this a reality, if that's what you're holding on to. So what does some of that look like? Whether you kind of have some of that pictured, how does that make you feel internally, knowing that, sure, we can continue to have billboards and we can have these events and we can make people aware, but if it doesn't lead to actually anything changing, where does that leave, you know, the four of you? Where does live the people of Linton? Where does it leave anybody in relation to this if the tanks continue to be there? And again, you're in a situation where you're at a severe disadvantage around power and resources. But you've kind of given yourself a challenge and other people a challenge by saying the tank's got to go. What does that look like? Again, even if you don't know the particulars, I mean, what does the road ahead look like?
You know, there are so many issues related to the tank farms. And one is air quality emissions. Have I said this yet? I think I have. The tank farms report to DEQ on an emissions inventory using a formula developed by the oil industry. This was challenged in Maine and Massachusetts a few years ago, found by independent testing to grossly underrepresent the actual emissions. EPA came in and said, we'll test. They did. Subsequently, that way of reporting was outlawed in those two states. So Linton has gone to DEQ 3 years in a row saying, will you adopt these two EPA methods that are more likely to realistically estimate the emissions? Because right now the other companies have a different way of reporting, but the tank farms are kind of given carte blanche because they're underrepresenting, so they can't be prioritized along a continuum fairly. And we have warned DEQ that we're going public with a campaign, a media campaign soon. We have between 35 and 50 organizations that have signed on to a letter that we're going to be circulating. We're going to go to social media. We're going to try to shake loose some pressure on DEQ to fill this request, because there seem to be people within the agency that are well-meaning, that believe we should not have to live this way, but we can't get the action we need because the system is just so frozen. So that's one thing we're going to do. But we have a lot of different ideas using the collaboration of the coalition to engage the feds. One of the lead seismic people for the last 15 years has reached out to the federal government, Wyden, Merkley, and our representative, all the representatives, saying the feds have a role. And the first email we got back from one senator who said, no, this is a state issue. So we're saying, nope, this is your issue, because if the projected 30,000 people die in this on your watch, you're going to be real sorry about this. So we're going to put a lot of pressure on a lot of different people. That's still within the system. We know that. But I think our main goal is to mobilize the masses to such a number that we can make some more radical changes. And Pam, jump in there.
Yeah, it's such a good question, and we'll keep asking you, Kai, and everybody else, like, what now? What now? We're a little bit ahead of ourselves in trying to figure out action, not ahead of ourselves, but this is new. This is like a year old that people are beginning to learn about the CEI hub, and the billboards are a giant kick forward. There's also a whole bunch of events happening throughout Portland called Rumble on the River that gather scientists and people with great knowledge to speak with neighbors. So this is still a time of informing people. We're still surrounded, in terms of the populace, we're surrounded by non-knowers.
Yeah.
So.
No, and I did mean to put you guys in the hot seat, but it's also to kind of demonstrate how difficult it is as an activist, you know, to sort of ask the right question and then hold on to that, because of all the factors that go into the realization of your world, of your quality of life, and it is not an easy thing. And so I appreciate what you guys shared along that. Just as a reminder, you know, there seems to be a lot of good activity going on in chat, and just let everyone know we will download the chat at the end of tonight's event. So if we have your email address, we'll be happy to send that out to you, so you have that, so you don't need to really dive into that too closely. We can also send a copy of this video after tonight as well, so you'll get all of that post our gathering, and we'll probably leave some time at the end to take questions. I know there's been a few dumped into chat already, and so we'll kind of circle back to that if we don't get to that within the conversation itself. A couple things came to mind. I introduced the four of you as and you made reference to it already, but I introduced you as the Sob Sisters. Can you guys, one of you, explain what that means to the four of you when you say Sob Sisters?
Nancy,
Me?
you originated that.
We envisioned ourselves as wheels on a bus because there are four of us. God knows why we did that. We talked about WOB for a while, and then we decided, no, it needed to be a little more direct. So it stands for stand outside the box, which was our way of saying that's the only way we're going to really make some changes, get outside of the box, even though we have to do inside of the box. I wanted to say one more thing about us to the audience. We are novices. Pam has some activist history. Sean and I have done a heck of a lot of research and taking in. Paula is relatively new. We are novices. So we feel that we learn from everybody we talk to. And we've seen a few things in the chat. You've got some ideas. You want to know if you could sign on. Thank you. We cannot do this without people like you supporting us. And we don't want to pretend to have the answers. Kai said he put us in a tough position. We don't totally know what's coming next, but we want to be intentional. That's Paula's word. We want to be intentional about it. And another of Pam's words is, this is a fixable situation. If we don't get blown up first, we're going to make a difference in this system, or people that go beyond us will.
Yeah, it was also, thank you for that, Nancy. I think that's absolutely important for people to hear, because and the experience of the ORCRN and my own organizing background, that is how pretty much everyone starts. You know, you become aware. In some ways, you are justifiably pissed off, and you're done expecting or trying to navigate a system that's really just a circus, and it's, you know, funnels you here and shoots you down there, and, you know, takes you over there, yet nothing changes. And you know, it's a big theme park type environment, of which, you know, for people to break free from is critical. And I see the four of you as being those kind of people that have, you know, stood outside the box or have left that theme park. And the big thing too is what you brought up with East Palestine. Yes, it wakes people up in the moment of when those calamities happen, but unfortunately, most of the questions asked are not the right questions. You know, people say, well, let's just make the train safer. How about none of that stuff should be produced in the first place to then cause the situation that happened with the derailment? You know, there isn't the going further upstream, and the big industry wants that. In fact, they promote that. They promote the asking of the wrong questions. And I'll drop it in chat for people later, but there's a great article from a retired OSU professor who speaks to this idea of red herrings, you know, the wrong kinds of questions being asked. And when those wrong questions are asked, all the organizing, all the activism, all the research, all the policy starts to funnel down the wrong pathway. And so I don't want to belabor it, but it's worth belaboring the fact that you've asked a very simple but different kind of question is so critical, and to hold on to that, because the pressures can become tremendously great to let go of that. And so I guess I'm applauding the four of you for starting there, because that is where it begins. Otherwise, your path looks very different.
And we can't play whack-a-mole.
Well, speaking of whack-a-mole, that is a game that is being played. The federal folks say it's local. The local, I remember the lady who came and said, really, Linton, there is no way for you to be safe other than to move. She said, this is pretty much a direct quote, those tanks are federally mandated. They must be there. And that is what the federal government will say. So, you know, we City of Portland, we have nothing to do with it. We will never have anything to do with it. It will always be the federal government's issue. Now, the federal, I spoke with Bonamici's office, and her aide said, I'm sorry, Congresswoman Bonamici can't get involved because it is a local issue. And, you know, that's what Merkley's office said. And the state is saying the city, and the city is saying the state, and the county is saying the city. And it has been a nightmare in terms of who takes responsibility. Answer everybody and nobody. It's extremely frustrating. We went on a field trip, if you will. Nancy and I, we took a young fellow from DEQ, and we walked down the ramp to Seaport Industries, I think it's called. I think it's owned by ARCO or one of the big guys. And we walked down. We just wanted him to be able to see a tank, you know, somewhat kind of sort of close up. And the security folks came right away and, you know, wanted to know why we were there. And one of the people wanted us to know, very importantly, you are standing on federal ground. You know, so, and Nancy made some comment, and he said, there is no other place these can be. These tank farms, these tanks must be here. They cannot be located any other place. And I think that is, you know, the folks who work there believe that in their hearts, that there is no other place for these tanks to be. And it's like beating one's head against the wall to try to get somebody to change their mind about something like that.
But, you know, we understand that the workers that are here are worried for their livelihoods. We get that. And there are a number of organizations supporting workers to transition into other fields and to help them see that their jobs don't have to die when fossil fuels go down. And because of the climate issue, fossil fuels are going down, but how quickly can we go? We're not very committed as a country to make that happen. So Kai is probably the best person to remind us to ask the big question, because we are likely to get sidetracked playing whack-a-mole on air quality, on renewables, on whatever. This is a learning curve for us.
Paula, you've been getting a shoulder ache there with your hand up. Very good student waiting for the teacher to call on you there.
It's just the art of distraction, right? So we're living in a world of distraction, and boy, asking those big questions around how did corporations end up having personhood, and should they have it? And do we have a centralized government or a centralized system of commerce? So asking those questions, I think, are important. But then you find out, like, oh, well, what about, do communities have power? And I want to say that in terms of stakeholders, I've often said, I just want to sit down with the CEOs of these big fuel tank companies, and talk to them neighbor to neighbor, like, hey, maybe we both agree we want to keep our neighborhood safe. Well, they probably don't live in Portland, but at any rate, one really interesting thing that's happening, well, lots of things, but one thing that's coming up this week is that Nancy's been able to reach out to Ned McCall, the owner of one of the fuel companies down in the hub. It's a local company, it's family owned, but Nancy, do you want to talk about our meeting with him on Friday?
This is a person we have not met. It's a family-owned business, but you probably know about Zenith Energy being a disreputable player in the hub, not telling the truth, doing things, lying about them, paying fines. That's been the poster child for activists, is get rid of Zenith Energy. McCall's a family-owned business just across the road from them on the water. And they recently submitted a permit for expansion to add tank car spaces, put new pipelines into the river so that they can do renewables. And we reached out to them and we're going to talk with them. We really want to hear their arguments. I don't know what we will do with that. He seems like a very nice gentleman. They go back a long time here. The air monitoring people have had a lot of success negotiating with industry. They have not had any, we've not had any success with the fuel tanks, the tank farm companies, nor the diesel traffic issues. I just wanted to say one more thing. DEQ, EPA, these were created by Congress to represent the public, the rights of the public with regard to the environment in opposing or controlling the industry. And it has morphed over time. Permitting that they do is exactly that. They permit levels that are unsafe. That's why we're in the pickle we're in about polluted air. They don't monitor after they do the permit, so the companies continue. So there's a real game going on if we think we have environmental protectors. Now, occasionally things pop up. I think the EPA's taken a good step or two, but generally the environment is losing over the last 50, 100 years. It's losing. So it's clearly a broken system there.
I see in the chat also that someone said about Aaron Brockovich's organization. I did a little research because I thought, how did Aaron Brockovich make, headway? What did she do? Well, she sued the company that was creating the air, the quality that was causing cancer. And so I looked a little bit into, can we sue the petroleum industry? And one of the things I came upon from a Harvard Law Review is that we should be looking, this is kind of bizarre, but we should be looking towards suing these kinds of companies for murder, because they are murdering people. They are murdering people with their air quality. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty big. I mean, I really hadn't thought about that. But I do think that every single company in the CEI hub is, if nothing more, they are recklessly endangering our lives by knowing that they are on soil that is liquefiable and continuing business as usual. So I think there is absolutely something to be said for suing them.
And they are being sued. There are more than 20 major suits against companies like this for lying about climate impacts. How many are going to win? We don't know, but we do know that focuses people's attention on how they have intentionally misled us, as has the natural gas industry. Intentionally, for 40 years, they have confessed to misleading us. It's time for it to stop.
Well, we got about close to about 15 minutes left.
Questions?
Yeah, well, I was going to see if there were other things that we hadn't gotten to just in our back and forth conversation here, and then was going to just turn it over to the audience to put questions in chat. I know there's some that have come up. I think some of them we've at least touched upon, others we may have not gotten to, but before we get to things that might be in people's heads that they want to ask, yeah, what else are you wanting people to know about Tank the Tanks, or just your own journeys and sort of understanding the system as kind of newbies into trying to make right, really, sort of deal with a very unjust, illegitimate reality and trying to change that as for people basically right now. I mean, what else do you think we haven't gotten to that is worth sort of sharing? And we'll make sure that we've got, links to the website and to Instagram and all that stuff in chat, so people have a way to come back to you. And there've already been offers of help in chat, which is fantastic. But
Yeah.
what else, in the collective time we have here together, do you guys want to sort of let people know about?
I have to say, finding each other has been instrumental. And so, and finding other activists in the coalition as well. And it's not an easy fight, you know, it's hard. And it's hard to look for significant data that says we're making progress. So a lot of stuff, we're just casting it out there and saying, maybe this will work. And the thing that really keeps me going is that there's great hope in connecting with other people who are called to action. So I think was the action is the antidote to despair? Is it? Yeah.
Yeah, and somebody in the Oregon Community Rights Network, Lane County, has a bumper sticker that says action
Action is the antidote to despair.
Action is the antidote to despair. So yeah, and we meet, the four of us meet at least every Wednesday for an hour and a half. So we know via Zoom. So we're, and other times as well, but we know we have this time carved out of our weeks and we can dive into, good Lord, you should see.
And we're inviting people to join us. So that's the other piece. We've learned so much from people. You know, we have been really fortunate to to be supported in that way. So just constantly growing, connecting the base, and yeah.
There are things on our website in the ACT section, and one is called Linton Speaks Out. It's an advocacy group of people that live in Linton, but also allies outside. And once a month, they send an email, make a call to an official that has the power to change. For example, we've been on Governor Kotek in Oregon recently to oppose the GTN expansion, pipeline expansion, because that will bring more fracked oil into our community. We don't need any more risk here. How impactful that will be, we don't know, but we are doing that. We're trying to stay on message.
One of the things also that we have going is people who are willing to take folks on tours of the CEI hub. And that, you know, I mean, I've lived in Linton for at least 22 years. And before that, I grew up in St. John. So I've seen the tank farms my entire life. But those folks who have not have been on the tour and have just been, you know, like blown away by seeing the CEI hub up close and personal. I think Pam and Paula, you folks took a tour early on, right? And that was impactful.
We took a tour, and then we actually started working together with Cedar Action to create a self-guided tour of the hub. And so we have a map that is available, and that's on our website as well. And there are 3 different tours you can take using the self-guided map.
I'm really anxious to hear the audience, Kai.
All right. Well, I think if you have a question, even if you've dumped it in chat before, I would recommend you bring it back in so it's kind of top of the list if we hadn't in some ways gotten to addressing it previously. But yeah, if you've got something that you want to ask about, please do so now. And you know, as people are formulating that, if you need a second or two, I mean, I think as you are learning, you know, this kind of activism work, especially that stands outside that box, you know, it's going to come in fits and starts in the sense of your capability to be seen or be heard, let alone to kind of move the needle towards the direction you want to go. So it's a long game. It's not a short game. And so I think you guys are coming to understand that. And I think that is the case with anything that's been that well established, that is that well protected. It's going to be that reality. I know a number of people here who've been trying to contend with the practices of the timber industry, and are very much in the same reality in the sense of how entrenched and protected it is, and that it's going to take a long effort to you know, eventually get to where we want to go, and to stay kind of resolute and confident that we can get there. Tracy, if you can be quick verbalizing your question, I'll let you talk. Otherwise, yeah, if you can just be quick so we get other people who have a chance to pose a question.
Sure. The question is there a level of interest in the present company to question why in Oregon, when we talk about public safety, it's just training firemen and police, and it excludes any consideration of the risks that we've been talking about for the last hour, from infrastructure that's been unregulated for 60 years and it's catching up with us.
You know, Yume Wang is big on this, Tracy. She's a professional engineer that's been involved with seismic studies for 15 or 20 years. And she's calling in the National Institute of Building Safety. It is a non-governmental organization formed by Congress to deal with major issues like this. I think it was in the 70s, don't quote me. But Jay Wilson also says that Japan, who's had multiple quakes, builds to a far higher level of safety in their building structures. We don't want to do that. We don't want to pay for it. It's not a priority. So in Japan, when there's a quake now, the lights flicker and people go on. You know, they've learned. We aren't the fastest learners, but seismic stability is huge. And on the other hand, Tracy, there is probably no structure that can withstand the amount of shaking that will happen from a magnitude 9, like along the coast. 4 minutes of shaking. It was likened to a paperclip bending, bend, and after a time it just breaks. So we are at Mother Nature's mercy. And yes, we hope building and standards will go up. So thanks for that question.
Well, it actually related to the way Oregon does governance, not standards, but we can move on.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Is there another question from the group here related to what we've been talking about, either specifically around, you know, the CI hub and tank the tanks, or just sort of a general question around, you know, activism and just sort of what we're up against? Mike?
Yeah, my career history is in the oil industry. I've actually worked in 5 refineries in California and have been involved in shipping transportation fuels to Oregon, since Oregon doesn't have its own refineries. They either come from Washington, mostly come from Washington or
Right.
California. I offer my services to answer a lot of those questions that you were bringing up through there, that I think I have some answers to that. And a lot of the politicians that are giving you information is bum information.
Mike, do we have your email address, or will you take ours? Because we would very much like to speak with you.
I'll put it in the question chat.
Great. And for everyone here, info@tankthetanks.org, you will reach us. info@tankthetanks.org. Thank you very much.
Anybody else with a question kind of related to where we've been journeying tonight?
Or suggestions or comments, just anything you'd like to share. This is scary stuff, and fear does motivate.
Nancy
Nancy.
Ward?
Yeah, so this is Nancy, and I just want to say that I think the billboard idea was absolutely brilliant. I live 20 miles down Highway 30 from Portland. We are a bedroom community. The majority of people who live in Scappoose work in either Washington County or Multnomah County. I can't tell you how many people have remarked, where did they come from? Where did these billboards come from? And have actually gone to your website. And, you know, it has become a topic of conversation along this corridor that, as you mentioned, people drive by it every single day and have no idea what's over there. You know, so I love the approach that you took. I think it was really beautiful, and I can't wait to see how other people in Oregon might use that idea of billboards or something different, you know, something other than writing letters and, you know, exhorting and pleading with elected officials. I just want to applaud you for your approach.
Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you.
Pam, you had your hand up?
We're surprisingly thrilled about billboards, having hated them all these years. Yeah, wow, what a great forum. And we were told by our billboard company that 85,000 people will see those billboards every week. 85,000.
We did have a question that had come up earlier and got reposted here, and that was whether or not other neighborhood organizations have become aware now of the issue that may have not been before, and if some of them have actually started to become more active in sort of the coalition or being sort of echo chambers for the idea of tanking the tanks.
You know, the clean air people that we've worked with for about 8 years started building a network. It now has 82 organizations in the network, 50 summer neighborhood associations, 16 faith-based groups. You can do the math, sundry other groups. There's probably the other 20 that's in our coalition. So we probably have a network of 80 different organizations within. So Linton Neighborhood Association can send out a letter, request their endorsement, and we can go to officials and say, these people stand with us. We were quoted by a number of legislators. There were 47 co-signers on our letter opposing Zenith Energy. So we did get the attention of some legislators that said, look, these people got. So yes, it is happening. It's not fast. It is not fast. It is labor intensive. But yes, there is some movement there.
That kind of leads me to another question, which is, you know, as you may pick up momentum, you're again asking a very different question here, which is the tanks have to go, not just one tank, all the tanks need to go. You have groups that have been working inside that box, who I can imagine will say, well, what you're asking for is unrealistic. We have to stay within the parameters of what we can do here, which is let's make the air a little bit better. Let's make the tanks a little bit safer. Let's address this kind of thing. And what you're doing is pulling people off in a direction that isn't going to materialize. And so you're being counterproductive to what we think really can make it a little bit better. Have you guys run into that yet? You know, are you anticipating running into that? Because it is things that we've seen in other kind of issue fights when people say, you're ridiculous, you're unreasonable, that's pie in the sky, we need to do what we've been doing, and you're basically stealing people, you're stealing money, you're stealing energy towards something that's not going to go anywhere.
We're trying to push, and I don't know whether you would even agree with that, but there is a push now to remove the decommissioned tanks because they sit there, they've got sludge in them, there are ignition risk, there are an environmental risk if they go in the river. If we can get rid of 72 tanks that are decommissioned, I don't know what the exact number is, I think that's right. We'll see that as a checkbox that we've removed some tanks. I don't know if it's wise to do it incrementally because it is being discussed. We're pouncing on it. We'll be back to you next week, Kai, for advice.
All right.
One thing I could add to that about the decommissioned tanks,
Yes.
if they're not full of water, they actually pose the biggest hazard of all. Is one of the things we never could figure out in our emergency action plan is how do you predict a tsunami? The worst thing you can have is an empty tank where the water rises along the side of the tank. What it eventually does is it breaks the tank from its foundation. It floats the tank up, and then that tank takes out the other tanks.
My question was, how big is the area of impact supposed to be if it comes to multiple explosions of these tanks?
That wasn't clear, Maria, and I think you did.
I'll translate. She's asking how big of an area would be impacted depending on the amount of explosions that could take. Like, what's the area of impact you're looking at if the tanks go up?
Oh boy. Well, the whole river down to the ocean would be impacted. So that's a huge number of miles. Linton would probably pretty much be blown off the map. St. John's would be. There would be toxic fumes going east for miles. Square footage, Maria, I don't think I can tell you. On our website, you can see the casualties. whether it's at the nighttime or daytime event. It's been likened to the worst catastrophe in US history, period.
And additionally, the whole state is impacted. So remember, 90 to 95% of our fuel is stored there. So the whole state will be impacted with these tanks.
I'm going to stop us here. I mean, we can go on all night. I really appreciate everyone being here. And I really do hope people engage with the four of you. I really appreciate what you started there in the conversation tonight. So I encourage those like Mike and others, you know, to connect with you and continue this and see where this can go. Appreciate everyone being here. This is, you know, we have these kind of Wednesday webinars every couple months. So if you're not on our email list, please get on it. We'll notify you of the next topic, the next discussion. But thank you, Paula. Thank you, Pam, Sean, and Nancy for everything, for being here tonight and for sharing. And like I said, we'll share the chat out to everyone as well as a copy of this, and appreciate everyone's time tonight. So thanks for being here.